wonderful stuff. Continuing on Jeff's theme of try to get yourself fired, I just have to bring to mind a comment that was made to me when I worked in the railroad business. One of the operating supervisors who I grew to love, at the first time I met him, I hated him because he used to scream at us. He screamed at the PR people because he thought we were idiots, and we probably were. But his comment was, if you weren't getting fired at least once a day, you weren't doing your job. So keep that in mind. And then there was a guy who took it literally when his boss fired him, and he cleared out his locker and went home, and 2 hours later his boss was looking for him. So where the hell is he? The guy says, he went home. You fired him. He said, get him the hell back here. I need him. So think about getting yourself fired. Jeff has in the room next door, I don't know if you all saw it, what I used to dream about when I was a kid, because I've started telling people I've been making podcasts since I was a teenager. How many of you make podcasts? A good number. How many of you listen to podcasts? A bigger number. Good. I started out in my basement, and some of you, does anybody else make pretend radio shows when you were a kid? Okay. All right, I started out in my basement. I didn't have all of the cool equipment that he has next door. He's got a radio station. He's literally got a master control room and an interview studio. He's got all the stuff I wished I had as a kid. I had a turntable and a reel-to-reel tape recorder, and I made pretend radio shows, and I drank Dr. Pepper. And now, 35 years later, I'm still in the basement. I'm drinking Diet Dr. Pepper, and I use it to wash down the cholesterol pill. But who knew these things were called podcasts, and we're now able to get clients to pay for the production of these programs where they control the content in a way that they haven't been able to control it in the broadcast media that Dean and I have had some time in. Dean had a little bit more time than I did, but I did spend some time in radio. And now it's a way for them to narrowcast to the audiences that Nellie was talking about, the narrow niche. Because the clients that we're working with in podcasting they're not interested in millions of eyeballs or millions of ears. There's a few thousand people that they need to reach as efficiently as possible. And when we saw the movie Meet the Parents, and Robert De Niro says to Ben Stiller, "You're outside the circle of trust, fucker," right? And we all laughed, but you know what? The circle of trust is a really powerful kind of a thing for the social media. We were talking about that over some pizza at lunch, that people turn to people they trust for references and recommendations. And so when they listen to a podcast and it has content they find valuable and they tell someone else about it, or if before he does a webinar, Chris Brogan says to someone, here are all the people whose videos we're going to play, here's their Twitter screen names, go follow them. And I'm out oblivious to this and somewhere else, and all of a sudden I have 150 emails from people who started following me because Chris Brogan said they should follow me. And I'm like, what have I got to say that these people could possibly be interested in? But it's a very powerful concept. And for the clients we've been working with, they've been extremely happy with the idea of reaching that narrow niche, and it replaces their need to do the one-on-one for the initial contact. So for example, we work with a large insurance company that insures very esoteric business risks. These are risks like the risk that your computer network is going to be breached and data is going to be stolen, cyber liability. We have a guy who specializes in this, and the podcasts are not a commercial for how great their insurance policy is. The podcasts are about him giving advice to people who have networks about the things they should be looking for, about the training they should be doing for their employees, checklists they should be thinking about, that sort of thing. Helpful advice, giving a piece of yourself. And that's what the whole social concept has been about, is giving a piece of yourself, useful information, and then letting people decide if you're giving them something that's worthwhile enough that they may want to seek more business. He's had, for his original podcast, about 2,500 downloads, which for many of you probably is not enough for you to think of even monetizing it. From his perspective, that's 2,500 cold calls or conference calls that he didn't have to conduct. And typically the way his business is done is sit on the phone and spend an hour with somebody explaining what it is they need to be worried about. So instead of him sitting on the phone and explaining it to those 2,500 people, his podcast does that for him. And that's increasingly what we're seeing corporate customers are willing to do. They don't want to do it themselves because there are very few companies that can justify hiring a full-time staff podcaster. There are companies, to be sure, that have internal broadcast facilities because they do internal videos and internal training programs, so it's easy enough for them to do it because the costs are already there. But for the vast majority of companies, they don't want to do it in-house, and they don't want to do it themselves. And again, we were talking, another group of us, if you look at the top 100 podcasts on iTunes, now we all know about Dawn and Drew. How many of you listen to Dawn and Drew? Just or have listened to it once and said, ew, and don't listen to it anymore? We have somebody who doesn't know Dawn and Drew. Who wants to explain it? May I? Or do you want to explain it?
No, I'm saying I don't know.
You don't know? Okay, then I will tell you, since there's more than one. Dawn and Drew, it's a, I guess, almost 30-something couple. They live in a farmhouse in Wisconsin, and they podcast from their kitchen, mostly about their private life, mostly in graphic detail, with sound effects, shall we say. I don't find it, do you listen to them?
Not anymore.
I don't find it particularly engaging, and yet they were at one time one of the most popular podcasts. People downloaded
But I
it.
think it's more the novelty of it. More
I think so. I think so, and I think it's kind of worn off a little.
And being on the front page of the New York Times in the 2 weeks early audio
That could help.
didn't hurt.
That could help, yes. But what you see when you go to iTunes and you look in the top 100 podcasts is a smattering of the quirky, oddball, Dawn and Drew type stuff. But the vast majority of the top 100 podcasts, it's what? It's professionally produced content from trusted media brands, mainstream media brands who are pushing the button that says make an MP3 instead of the button that says put this out over the transmitter. So you have to think in terms of making the content sound good. There have been many, many comments on all kinds of blogs and social media about how people will look at badly produced video if the sound is good.
And now, Steve, would you argue though, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, if iTunes was there and you were podcasting was the beginning, my opinion was that people who have a voice, podcasting is wonderful, but over time you get silenced out by all the majors who basically have who put great production quality behind their content, and the long tail gets flattened by people who actually are able to better produce, better promote, and better present.
Absolutely true if you're focusing on where everyone else is. And again, I go back to what Nellie said about the narrow niche, because the podcasts we're producing are not top 40, we're not doing like, we're not trying to be the news, like the New York Times or
Sure.
CBS. We're not trying to be, Adam Curry and the Daily Source Code. What we're doing is we're providing an ability for corporations that want to give of themselves a little bit and communicate with audiences that have a very narrow need, a way to do that in a podcasting environment. So, it's a very different model than, I want to be like MTV, or I want to be...
No, I would argue, I actually agree completely with what you're saying. I saw the same thing with Internet TV, that when I was doing Network 2 a few years ago, I spent a year looking at episodic long-tail Internet TV shows.
Mm-hmm.
Thousands and thousands of shows, and I found hundreds of indie creators of content, all early in the game. But today, if I look at where the popular Internet TV shows are going to be, it's not necessarily in the long tail. It's actually people now from high-quality studios coming forward, making great stuff happen. On podcasting, same thing. I was recording stuff before it was called podcasting, a long, long time ago. I did it for myself to share ideas. I really didn't care who was listening.
Right,
I ran Pulver Radio for 8 years. God knows
I talked about being jealous of your equipment.
And but I think that what you're getting at, though, I think there are two things that I find very fascinating. One is that as a company, any company in the world could use podcasting as a way to better get the message across.
Absolutely.
And that's free. I mean, you have to put your time, put the quality events into it. But I've listened to your podcasts, and I like the way they're produced, and I like the messaging that comes across. And I listen to a bunch of people's podcasts to try to get to know the people, get to know the personalities, more so than even the content. And then if you but the pain point is, you said, the economicals. I mean, some people here just to make money. And if you have great engines or great people behind you and you're on the iTunes stuff where you can actually get in the top 100, it matters a lot. But it's just, I find it frustrating that some of the best content and some of the best people are not necessarily ever discovered.
Well, the reason I use iTunes as the metric is because, as I understand the way the top 100 are calculated for iTunes, it's purely based on the volume of downloads. And I think it has something to do with the trending over the weeks, how many this week versus the previous week. But it's agnostic to the popularity contests that are common on a lot of, like Podcast Alley and some of the other places where people say, go vote for my podcast to be the top podcast. It's done by what people value. So yeah, they're obviously going to get higher visibility because people, again, trust the brand. But what happens is the clients that we're working with are not, they're not unhappy with small amounts of downloads because it's a narrow niche that they want to reach. And it's easier for them to reach that niche than to try, I mean, when I was in radio, and you can appreciate this, or when I got into PR after radio, and I tried to take audio clips, actualities we call them, and send them or pitch them to news directors at radio stations. It was very time consuming and tedious, and maybe you'd be lucky to get 12 seconds of your CEO on a newscast on a station in Yedemsville at 2 a.m. And now what you can say to the client is, we can deliver your entire presentation, your entire content in a way that you control over a mechanism that you control, namely your RSS feed, your blog, your website, wherever we put it. That's a really powerful message to them about getting their content out, and that's why it's been working the way we've been doing it. But you're absolutely right. You're competing against. I can't compete with CBS.
Well, actually,
Yet.
yeah. Well, maybe you can. It's just you're competing in a different metric. Maybe the quality of your content is higher, but maybe people just have to discover you. I still think that the tools don't exist on the internet for proper search and discovery. I mean, I discovered that with Internet TV.
It's true.
That I thought I built a site that aggregated thousands of shows that I would deliver what people want to see. But I didn't realize at the time it wasn't about search, it was all about discovery. Same thing for podcasts. I still think today the tools really don't, the semantic web hasn't really happened yet, and there's not enough indexing right now. There's not enough people going out there and taking all your podcasts and converting them to text, and then searching them and converting them against different languages so people can easily find you. And I think that we're still a generation in between.
I think so.
To get through. By the way, we're now number 5 again on Twitter. Trending up.
We're trending upward.
Apparently we lost it completely when we were at lunch, but now we're number 5 on the rise.
Oh, that's good.
Can I just add,
Yeah, please.
to your point, there's a lack of standards and practices for the semantic web to enable discovery, unlike there is for text in
Right.
terms of search.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's
Text
a
is easy.
critical point. And another point about professionalism, and I preach this like mad. There was a period right after, I guess about 4.5, 5 years ago, when Dave Weiner discovered podcasting, kind of the way
Created the
created
exposure, right.
Discovered or invented?
All of the above. We're talking Dave. And you saw that picture in an article. Anyway, one of the things that many people espoused at that moment as really critical, and I'm just going to be blunt here, was the dreadful, shitty quality of their podcast, of which they were proud.
Sure. That was considered a badge of honor at the
Yeah,
time.
to have a really
should
shitty
be
production
amateurish.
was to show just how real and in the moment you were. And I used to point out to people that your baby crying on an airplane is only GQ to you. Everyone else is upset. The fire engine, when you're recording something, a fire engine go by, it's like, hey man, wow, there must be a fire. Cool. No, you've wasted their valuable time. Professionalism is everything, unless the title of your show is The Unprofessional Show.
It's the transition between college radio and professional radio. And I listened to, one of the first podcasts I listened to, the person was a woman, I don't remember what it was, but her content was very, very good. She was really authoritative in the content. And I'm listening, and halfway through the podcast, she goes, honey, please be quiet, I'm doing my podcast. And I'm thinking to myself, guys, this is not live radio, you can edit it,
Yes,
it's
editors do
okay.
exist. Although I'd argue the point that I was at a conference, and apparently a baby giggling on YouTube is like one of the most watched videos. So while things may be personal, I mean,
Context.
yes.
That, and then there are people who say, oh, we want to do a viral video, do a viral video for us, right?
Yeah, make my video viral.
Right.
There's a question?
It's like telling a comedian to be funny.
Be funny.
Isn't that part of the just following the market though? If the market tells you that they pretty much want better videos, better quality sound, that you should follow what your consumers and people following you are asking for?
Well, that's exactly what I think the iTunes ranking is telling people. And
Yeah.
the question is, how many people are listening?
I mean, I do understand the spot of needing a space for the beginners to be discovered, but I also see that that's not a problem that's stuck with just podcasting. That's just capitalism in general. As you get more money, you build your business up and improve your quality, and you stand out amongst the pack.
It's a lot like when HP came out with the LaserJet 2 and WordPerfect 5.1 for DOS, those of you who may be old enough to remember it. Remember when fonts became available in writing?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the memo that used to take 10 minutes to write now took 2 hours to format, and 30 fonts on page 1.
Well, anyone remember
and a piece of
LaTeX?
and a piece of clip art, because we could. And, and all the graphic designers were tearing their hair out saying, they don't know anything about design.
I'd like to also add one other point about iTunes versus distribution.
Mhm.
If you have a special program for a specific audience, depending on the age and orientation of your audience, and how tech savvy they may or may not be, you may do much better with downloads. Downloads they're clicking on it.
Downloadz.com, is that what it is?
No. Downloads.
Oh, downloads.
People are down, they're going,
Yeah.
or they're listening to it, they're streaming it,
Right.
on their machine. That does not generally show as, you don't need iTunes for that.
No.
And there are people who have download success for their target market, who don't show in iTunes. And I actually had a client of mine, very happy with his, how many people were listening, and, the reports were good, who asked me in all seriousness why he didn't show on iTunes.
I'll tell you the reason why we put it in iTunes at all, and that's the theater of podcasts.
Yes.
Because we don't get a lot of downloads from iTunes, but the clients do like the idea that they're in iTunes.
Yeah.
Because they show that to their clients and their bosses, and everybody's like, wow, that's our logo in iTunes. Cool. Yes, ma'am.
Has iTunes released the whatever algorithms they're using to, put you on that new? Because I've launched a video podcast and I was on the new and notable section of iTunes for tech for 20 minutes. I mean, I don't know how long it was.
Congratulations.
No, but it was not long at all. And then there are ones that were there from week to week to week.
Most people don't get 20 minutes, but that's
Well,
Did you take a screenshot?
no.
that's very cool.
Photoshop.
But I was just because I've had people specifically ask me, what's the method to
I
the
believe
iTunes
under-
madness?
I could be wrong, but I believe somewhere on their spec site, they describe the methodology for how they calculate the top 100 podcasts. Do you know, Nellie? They do explain it. And it's
Well, I mean,
kinda-
top 100 is different than if you want to search to find my podcast, unless you specifically searched for the name,
Mhm.
you had to go there's no iTunes is very bad at browsing.
Do you meditate?
Well, yeah, of course, but it's still you'd still have to use the search function. iTunes is very
And it's not that good.
on the front page of the technology section, that's not always rotating. That's generally the same. Other than that, you basically have to scroll through a list of every technology podcast, and there are thousands and
Yeah, that's
thousands.
not the
of
ideal place to be. Nellie, and then over here.
I also think that for iTunes to publicize how to get on that first page is going to corrupt the whole
Yeah.
system.
Yeah, they're
because
not going to tell
I
you.
don't think they would tell you.
And I think
how
that's
to-
not. I don't think that's machine
Right.
created. I think
It's not.
actually
They
have
they
people
look
who
at them
choose them.
because they have staff favorites and they have
Right.
whatever. I agree. I mean, my show definitely gets 10 times more views on the website and on the embeddable video
Yeah.
players and on links
That's
through
that's
Twitter
exactly the
or
reason
whatever
we're getting is about 10
than
times.
I do on iTunes. But I like having it on iTunes because, my mom can tell her sister that if she searches for it in iTunes, then she'll find it and she can watch
It's
it.
always about making mom happy. You know that.
You
Always.
know,
Well, my mother's on Twitter.
Clients have moms too,
Yeah, no.
My
So-
clients have more mothers.
right?
I was just going to say the same thing, that's probably not an automatic situation. In a notable section, it's probably someone physically going out and through social media finding the best things going on and posting those specifically in that section.
Which is
I
cool.
think the top 100 is definitely your
Well, it's
algorithm.
the top 100 is top downloads.
It
It's
used to
most
be
watched.
just the total cumulative top number of downloads, and then they changed it, and it now has something to do with of new postings this week, the number of downloads. I don't know exactly what.
Well, they're doing a filter. They're doing a filter.
I'm sorry?
It's like figuring out how to
It's
rank
trying to
higher.
figure out a Google search. I will tell you one thing too, that the other, it's kind of a side benefit, and we don't do a lot of, some of you are doing search engine optimization techniques that involve, really understanding and learning about how they calculate the page ranks and everything. But what we're finding is just by putting out content for the clients and having it out there, having the feeds properly configured and getting it out, raises the search terms that our clients are interested in. without having to agonize over it too much.
Well, I'm a huge believer in creating great content, because when you have great content, people will share it anyway. We have all of you have shared something with somebody, and it had to be because it was really interesting content that you wanted to show somebody else. And then the viral aspect of the whole social media world is there, because people will send it to other social networks and then
Right.
it just spreads.
And we've
So-
actually been proactive in doing some of that. One of the nice things is we create some content for a financial services group. There's a group called New Jersey Bank Marketing Association. They have a quarterly seminar, which we do a video podcast of. And we've taken those videos, in addition to putting it on their own website and on their RSS feed, there's a group that someone created in Ning for financial services people. And they've been perfectly accommodating in us reposting the link to the Blip player right in Ning, so that all of the financial services podcasts go there, and we have some that we do on tech that go into one of the tech forums on Ning, and they love it because they're getting extra content. Yeah.
Now, do you feel like it's better to find the right place for your content and just put it in that one or two places where you're really focused? Or do you think that things like Tube Mogul, put it everywhere, why not? If you get 5 viewers from this side and 5 viewers from this side, then it's worth it. Like, which do you feel like
I've
is
looked
a
at
better
TubeMogul.
one?
We actually use Blip, which does pretty much the same thing as TubeMogul.
Not as much, but
It's
yeah.
a double-edged sword. It has much more to do with the content of your product.
Yeah.
It's not an open question.
I also think it's a question of how much time you have. Like if you want to be able to have, if you have the time to spend and post your content everywhere else.
Well, the thing is,
Tube
TubeMogul does it everywhere. You post it once and it puts it everywhere.
But you can also go to other social networking sites and just post links to your content and
Well, that's
just be
just spam.
not necessarily. If
Well,
you go to
it's-
niche communities
Oh, yeah, I mean,
that
but-
care about your stuff. Yeah.
Or even it's spamming yourself or having a service spam for you. The thing
You're
is,
right. No, you're right.
it comes down to context. And if you have something that's it's general content that somebody's mom is going to be cool with, a tween is going to be cool with, and your brother-in-law, then you know what? Carpet bombing users is fine. But nobody in my family, with the exception of one person, is remotely interested in any content I produce.
Right.
So I don't even bother them.
Right. I tell my mom about some of the stuff I'm doing, and she says, I have no idea what you're talking about, but I'm so thrilled that you're doing it.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's good.
I was working for a startup that was a user-generated advertising company, and we would get users, about 6,000 around the world, to produce videos for companies like Heinz and stuff like that. And it didn't matter how much we pushed it using some of these platforms, all the different sites, and basically spam people and sent it out to users and joined with other partners. If the content was garbage, it didn't go anywhere. No matter how much people were paying, no matter how much prize money was going into the content, no matter what the level of these, these are all top level people who have been at agencies producing videos, and some of them were okay, but unless it was, unique or exciting or part of a conversation or emotionally connecting, it just didn't get the hits. You have to be able to produce at some point level to be able to.
It goes back to the comment I made earlier about the credit card companies and the affinity cards and the groups that are passionate about a particular piece of content. We produced, I was telling some folks earlier, we produced podcasts for a social service agency in South Jersey that's been running a series on different kinds of new treatment modalities for cancers, primarily cancers affecting women. And one of the panels that we recorded a podcast from was about ovarian cancer, which, if you ask most people, they think ovarian cancer is like a death sentence, and new treatment has come about that, it's not the Gilda Radner situation necessarily anymore. There are people who are survivors, and they had 5 survivors on the panel, and a doctor who specializes in this type of treatment, and a nurse, and it was a very compelling panel. It was 2.5 hours long, and most people would say, you're crazy, a 2.5-hour podcast has had over 1,000 downloads, because there's people who, let me tell you, when ovarian cancer is a topic you're interested in, God forbid any of you ever have to deal with it, but when it's a topic you're interested in, you want as much information as you get your hands on. So that's a passionate community that's going to listen to good content if you can deliver it.
I think we're about out of time.
The only thing, I just want to end with one story, and that is to put everything in perspective. How many of you are Clint Eastwood fans? How many of you watch the Dirty Harry movies? Okay, the second most popular tagline from the Dirty Harry movies, second most, was, it starts with Mans.
What?
Gotta know its limitations.
Man's got those
Man's
limitations.
got no limitations for magnum force, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so the reason I bring that up is because when I first started producing podcasts, the only computer in our house that had iTunes on it was my daughter, who was a teenager at the time. She's a little bit older now, because she had the iPod. So I programmed it to download the podcast to make sure that it was working right, because it's a technical process. Those of you who tried to put podcasts in iTunes. One morning she comes down to breakfast. She says, "Dad, your podcasts are in my iPod, and I don't know how to delete them." And I said, "Good." And she says, No. She says, "My friends found them and were listening to them and laughing. I was so embarrassed." So, I was a PR guy in another life. I said to her, "Hey, the correct answer to your friends is, at least my dad has a podcast. Does yours?" And she looked at me. If you have teenagers, you know the look she gave me. And she said, "Don't ever use that argument in public again."